they say Joe Edwards passed away lately?
Yeah, about a week ago.
Okay.
Joe Edwards, and that was one of his licks there. He showed me that once upon a time. That little lick there that he played in Galloping on the guitar.
Uh-huh.
Remember that old Chet?
Oh yeah.
Joe was in the staff band there on the Opry for years and years. He was a guitar player and a fiddle player there in the Opry house band.
Okay.
And I forget who he played for before, way back in the 50s and 60s. He was a Nashville picker, a nice guy. And he showed me that lick.
I remember we used to see him at the Chet convention all the time.
Yeah, him and Jan, Joe and Jan. And I saw him for years, but I didn't really know who he was until Ray Wicks introduced me to him. One day he said, "Do you know Joe?" I said, "Well, Joe who?" Edwards. And he took me over and introduced me to him there. He had a little table set up at the convention.
Yeah.
And after that, we got to be kind of convention buddies. I'd see him every year and sit and talk to him a little bit there at the table. And, these old Nashville guys, they had stories on end, no stories. And he would tell me old stories, from the old days. And one of them I remember we were talking about, at that time I was playing a tune that I'd worked up with Webb Pierce. That old tune from back in the 50s called Walking the Dog.
Yeah.
Let's see. I was playing that for him one afternoon there at the convention, and he was telling me this story that he Red Sovine, if anybody ever remembers.
Yeah.
Red Sovine. Now there's an old name. And this was back before all the truck driving songs and all that stuff, you know. But in the early 50s, Red Sovine was a real, you know, he could write a song and sing it. And like a lot of the early 50s people in the music and singing, they were like I guess an offshoot of Hank Williams Sr. at that time. And you know, so Red Sovine was no exception. He was right in there, and so anyhow, Joe was telling me, you know, I played that Webb Pierce song for Joe, and he said, well, I remember being on a recording session with Webb Pierce and Red Sovine, and he said Webb was having trouble coming in at the right time on the song. And after 3 or 4 flops, he said Red got up and said, Webb, just look at me and I'll point at you when it's time to sing. So he said they backed the tape up and did it again, and Red pointed at him, and Webb came in and sung and got it right. But anyhow, that was a little lick that Joe taught me years ago, that old Chet thing called Galloping on the Guitar.
It's a good leg.
Yeah, he's a nice guy. Really hate hearing that he's left us, but he's a nice guy, and he knew a lot of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. Ray Wicks was he was an old Nashville hand too.
Yeah.
He'd been around for forever, and he knew them all. And so Ray introduced me to a lot of his old buddies around town when we would be in town for the convention. Of course, you know, most of them were gone by then, you know, but the ones that were still living, I think I met a lot through Ray. And Joe was one of them. And Joe was one of these quiet guys. You know, you'd never know it because unless somebody pointed him out,
Yeah.
you'd never know it. So
I didn't even know he played guitar there for a while. And, you know, I'd see him and his wife, and I know you'd go talk to him.
Guitar and fiddle player on the Opry there for years and years in the staff band.
Well, we got some videos of you and Ray playing down there. You played with him, you know, just jamming around quite a bit.
Yeah, there's a few of Ray and me, and I think we got one or two of Ray telling a story or two. I don't think I got anything of Joe.
No, I don't think we did.
I don't think we ever did do anything in front of a camera.
Yeah.
At least not that I know of. But he would come and sit in the back of the room when I was up playing.
Uh-huh.
And you know, after I found out who he was, it kind of made me nervous, intimidated me a little bit. Joe Edwards is watching me. Uh-oh, I better play good.
There you go.
he's a nice guy. Sorry to see him go. And, you know, another nice guy that really introduced me and got me around to a lot of Nashville people was Dave Stewart.
Yeah.
And he's another one of these guys that you've never heard of that knows everybody in town.
Right.
And, you know, just from being there 50 years, I guess.
Well, he wrote the newsletter too there for quite a while.
Yeah, he was a writer and wrote, you know, a lot of articles and newsletters, and I don't know if he wrote any books, but he certainly got in a few books. Some of the things that he wrote. So people were always seeking him out for an opinion or information or, you know, photograph or something, you know, from 50 years ago, or I should say probably 80 years ago. You know, 50's a little too soon. I think he goes back to like the late 40s, early 50s.
Yeah.
That's a whole other story there, Dave Stewart. Well, it seems to me like, I don't remember the year, but it seemed like it was about July when he passed on.
Yeah.
It's been a few years,
It's
maybe
been
3 or 4 years, but it seemed like it was sometime in July.
Yeah.
The Dave Stewart story.
Uh-oh.
Well, let's see where to begin. You know, he really helped me a lot in this business. I was playing here locally, and you know, I never can do anything the right way. It seemed like everything I do it backwards.
Okay.
I can never walk in the front door of anywhere. They look at me funny and say, "Who's this guy?" It's like a backwards thing with me, but Dave Stewart. That was another one of them backward tales of, you know, how I got where I got without really trying. And so I was up, you know, here locally playing after I quit the TV business for good, you know, and started playing my guitar again and full time, more or less, locally, that is. And I'd put out a couple of CDs, I think, by then. I don't remember when that would be. It'd be around 2005, I guess, 2006, somewhere along in there. So I had one of my CDs that I had made and put out was doing pretty good. I had a thing with Barnes and Noble. They were stocking them in the local artists section there at the bookstore, And I had a couple of buddies that were electronics guys. They weren't pickers. They were into, ham radio and sound systems and stuff like that. And let's see, is Bill Mountjoy and George Tipton.
Yeah.
And their thing was they would go around to all these ham fests, and set up their table and buy and sell and swap electronics gadgets. And Bill had gotten kind of into my playing, and he was selling CDs, just a handful here and a handful there. Well, he started taking boxfuls of CDs with him to the ham fest and setting them out and selling them for me, to whoever walked by, and well, one day they went to Chattanooga to a big ham fest down there, and they set up their stuff, and they had a few of my CDs there. And one of the guys that walked by and heard my playing and bought one of the CDs was let's see, what was his name? Dave Helms. How do I remember that? I'm terrible with names. Dave Helms, he heard my CD playing and bought one. And in the meantime, I guess he had shared it with his friend Dave Stewart down in Mississippi. So months later, the phone rang, and it was Dave Stewart calling, and I'd never heard of him. I knew there was a Dave Stewart that was publishing a guitar magazine, but I didn't, think they were the same one.
Yeah.
And so he was going on and on about my playing and all this. And what he said was that I had a early sound, and he was referring to Chet, saying that I had an early thumb sound, the 40s and the 50s, that sort of a thumb lick.
Right.
And he wanted to know how I came by that, and I says, well, I don't know, that's just how I play. I've listened to Chet all my life and grew up playing a guitar or a fiddle or something, And I had an aunt that played with a thumb pick. That's another story there. I don't know if I ought to tell it here or not, since we're doing Dave Stewart, but I had an aunt, Ethel. They grew up back of Kingsport over Weber City. In those days, that's where the Carters were. A lot of them were from, that whole area right in there. Well, that's where Ethel and that family, which is Grandpa and all the uncles and aunts, and Ethel was one of the aunts. Well, they grew up in that time right there, and she played with a thumb pick like Maybelle. Now, I'm not making anything out of that. I'm just saying that's how people played over in there. You know, that was just how you played. You know, thumb pick and a finger. And so I grew up hearing all that and playing it, learning it. That's just how I played, you know. And so Dave, he kind of took an interest in what I was doing, and he started sending me stuff and tapes and stuff that he had from way back. He was a member of the original Chet fan club that Margaret Fields started, I think, in 1950 or 51, whenever it was, the first one back then. And him and Jim Farron, which I got to meet him through Dave, you know, eventually he introduced me. And so anyway, Dave, every time we'd go to Nashville, we'd meet up there, and he would take me around and introduce me to all these people he knew. And he knew everybody. You know, Tommy Flint, Bresh, Tom Bresh. He first introduced me to Paul Yandell. And so, you know, anybody he could find to introduce me to, he introduced me. And one of the guys that he introduced me to, or he really talked me up, I guess, to, was Mark Pritchard. He was the president of the Chet Atkins Society. Still is. And he kept, you know, pushing and promoting my name and sending him recordings. And finally, Mark put me on the program without even meeting me. So, you know, just from, I guess, Dave's word and hearing my recordings. And so that started a whole other avenue there, you know, was the playing at the Chet thing every year. And of course, from that, you met everybody, you know,
Right.
playing there. So yeah, Dave Stewart, he had a lot to do with a lot of my later success, you know, and being, you know, becoming, you know, known, I guess, around. And so, yeah, he's gone too. He died, I think, in July, about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
2022, I think.
Could be.
Somewhere along in there, I lost track now, but.
There's Dave Stewart's house in Corinth, Mississippi.
I was going to show you that picture. The guy that wrote that book,
Yeah.
there's lots of history in that book on about Bixby. That's him right there. He wrote a book, Andy Babuke wrote this. He wrote a book on the Beatles guitars.
Oh.
And this came out in one of the magazines.
All right.
But this is,
Now he wrote that book?
he wrote this book.
Wow.
And the good thing, when you get your name in books, you get free copies, see.
Yeah.
This is all about the history of the Bixby guitar and Hank Thompson. Here's a good picture of Merle. I'll show you if I can find it. This lady passed away, but she was a cornetist. She played on Merle's record some. Look at that. Boy, he was a sharp-looking guy. See, when he got that guitar, this cutaway was not on there.
Yeah, that's what you
This
told
big,
me.
fancy, see, that's a Fender, if you
Right,
get to looking at
headstock,
it.
yeah.
But Fender tapered it down some.
Right.
And that guitar's in the Hall of Fame up there. This goes into a world of stuff. Of course, Merle also, the tremolo, that was his idea. He went to Paul Bixby and said, Bigsby made a fortune off of that treble. You know, the whammy bar.
Right.
You won't just shoot anything there.
Larry will want to know what your digs look like. That's all I'm doing. At least I think of it. He like that. He'd like to have that picture of Chet, I bet.
Now this picture here is 1948. Merle came back to Drexboro to do a benefit.
Merle Travis?
Merle Travis came in and
That's the year I was born.
in 48. He raised money for the school. That's him sitting right here. And that's that girl that gave me those pictures.
I'll be darned.
And that's two of his band members.
Yeah, I can see it now that I've zoomed in on it there. And that was 1948.
48, and that building's still standing. I've been right in that. They still have little banquets and stuff. It's in Drexboro, which was a big coal producer back then.
Amazing.
These pictures are my memories, and that's what you got when you get older.
Well, that's it can certainly help you remember. Now you've
And
got
the thing about it, at least 1/3 are dead.
really.
That Janet J was on Hee Haw. Remember the fiddle player, the gal that played?
Oh yeah.
And me and my good buddy, Merle's daughter, and boy, there's a picker. Played with Van Dyke, Leroy Van Dyke.
Yeah.
Good friend. I call him all the time. He's
Oh, I was
worked on
going
my.
to ask you, where did you get that Gimbal CD? The one?
Not the brother of Gene Gimbal.
No.
No, it was Gene Gimbal.
Gene Gimbal.
Yeah, he was. I got a friend. His pictures here somewhere.
Because you know you can't find that CD anymore.
No, he had some made.
Oh boy, that is some good
It is darn right.
music.
He has some songs I never heard on there.
Well, I got to listen to that the other day, and I said, man,
I really like that.
I started playing it over and over again.
I got a
after.
good friend who's in one of these pictures, lives in Memphis.
Yeah.
And he got to know him and brought him over there, and I went over there.
Well, boy, I'll tell you, I'm really proud to have a copy of that.
This is Spider Rich that wrote him and Boots Around off of Yakety Sax, you know.
Oh,
Everybody, I used to, when I was working in Huntsville, I'd go up and see him
yeah,
because it wasn't too far. This is a guy that, remember Beverly Hillbillies
yeah,
and Ellie Mae that had all those animals?
yeah.
He's the man that supplied them. This is at his ranch, he calls it.
Huh.
And these people right here, well, somewhere here, took me up there, me and Becky. And we spent a whole lot of time. Remember years ago there was a movie with a little dog called Benji.
Yeah, oh yeah.
That was Benji.
That's Benji.
Made
I
a fortune off of Benji.
Yeah.
He made a fortune off the Beverly Hillbillies too. Real nice guy. Frank N. And you always see his names on the credits when you see those old films. That's Chet's first fan. Chet says Buster.
Oh,
You've heard of Buster.
I think I've heard that story.
I can't
yeah.
think of his last name. That's before he died. But a lot of those have passed on. God, here's the one greatest Travis player there was. He's dead. Spider's dead. So many of these. That's Billy Grammer. Remember, had Got to Travel On?
I remember the song. I
Yeah.
don't remember
Well, he
him.
was a heck of a player. Not a fingerstyle, but this is my, golly.
What? So,
That's my buddy had the surgery. I was telling you up in Missouri, went to high school with.
oh yeah.
This is my friend. He's dead just recent, not too long. Was Highway Patrol. Marcel Dottie. Now I've got some records, but he was a
Oh,
great
I've
fan.
got a training tape by him.
Yeah. He wanted to put one of the best Merle Travis things ever
Yeah,
was.
and he died in
He
an
got plane
airplane.
that crash. That one that they ain't figured out. That 747. It blew up
Yeah,
right after it took off.
I'll be darned.
He's from France.
Yeah, I've learned a couple of Travis tunes off of him.
Oh, he's good. This guy is presently, he's about, this picture's in 92, so hell, that's 20 years ago, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
92,
At least. Yeah.
02,
Yeah,
and 12.
2012.
Okay. He is the lead guitarist for, who's that big bluegrass guy that lives in Nashville?
Oh gosh, there's so many.
Oh,
of them.
the biggest one, he produces a lot of shows and stuff. Anyway, this was at Spider Rich's house when I was telling him about wrote Yakety Sax.
Right.
In 92, me and Dave, and he's the one who lives in Chattanooga, grew up in Knoxville. You go down to Lynn's. But Cody Kilby, and he playing banjo. Then Spider taught him guitar. Boy, he was a whiz on guitar. So he's ended up playing with Ricky Skaggs. Ricky
Okay,
Skaggs. And boy, he's a fine picker now. He was wanting to go play basketball, and he was worried about jamming his fingers. You know how you get them
Oh,
jammed?
yeah.
That's Ramona Jones. She is such a nice lady. Boy. And this guy, if you ever see a picture in Nashville, Lightning Chance, he played every record that came out of Nashville in the 40s and the 50s there.
Lightning
He died.
Chance.
A really, really nice guy. He's a congressman right here, and that's Paul Yandel who played the Chet. He just died last year.
Yeah, that's
I went
what
to his-
Larry was telling me that. Larry ran into him in a music store in Nashville. He said, he told me that story. Paul didn't know who, of course, didn't know who he was,
No,
but
but-
Larry was sitting there playing, and Paul apparently watched him for a while, and after he got done, he said, pretty good.
I bet that
And
made
Larry
him
never
feel.
even told him who he was. I mean, yeah, I'm sure it
Yeah,
made Larry
he
feel
bragged
good.
on me one time, and I thought, him saying something about me?
Well, that's, yeah.
But these represent a lot of years of some good times when the people were still alive.
Well, I like your little hideaway here. This is nice.
Well, I got to sit down and compare, see what he's doing it right.
Well, it sounds pretty good to me.
This got some.
Now, what model is that?
I think it's J45 or something like that, I
okay.
believe. Ah.
You know, a funny story, you know, I keep said that I never can go in the front door of anywhere for some reason. I always have to do it the backwards way. Well, there again with Dave, this is the same way, you know, he's the guy that got me in, you know, by talking about me to anybody that would listen. Thank you, Dave, wherever you are.
When did you first go to the Chet convention?
05, I think.
Okay.
Dave got me to go there.
Yeah.
He got me all signed up and everything.
Okay.
And I didn't know them and they didn't know me. So that was kind of an experience, you know, going for the first time. And you know, it's one thing to have Joe Edwards sitting in the back of the room looking at you when you're playing, but when you've got 500 guitar players
Oh, yeah.
sitting in the audience watching everything you do, that make the sweat come out a little bit. So it was kind of a test. And but anyway, yeah, I did it the backwards way as usual, and of course, once I got in, you know, and I was able to make good and play something that people liked, I got invited back, and of course, it just went on from there.
Yeah.
I think I can fake my way through it.
Okay.
Dave one day, I said, listen, Dave, I wrote you a letter about 25 years ago and I never got a reply. I was wanting to join your Cannonball Rag and I mean, you never wrote me back. And he couldn't remember ever receiving my letter. Now, I don't know if it got lost or, you know, whatever happened.
Yeah.
But now, isn't that funny? You know, I tried to write to him. This would be in the late 80s or early 90s. I think the late 80s. You know, trying to connect, and then through some unknown reason, it never did happen. You know, he didn't get my letter or something went wrong. And then 25 years later, here's the guy that buys a CD in Chattanooga that I never heard of, and then he sends it to his friend Dave in Mississippi, who to that time I hadn't met, I'd heard of. And then here's his calling me on the phone. Now, isn't that a strange and odd turn of events?
No, it's a good.
You know, it kind of worked in reverse.
Yeah.
It just took 25 years to happen. And, you know, it was, you know, the Chat Society was kind of a repeat of that same thing in a way. I had written to Mark years earlier. I don't think it was 25 years. It might have been like 10 years in the late 90s, somewhere along in there, 97, 98. And I never got a reply back from him. So I figured, well, they're just out of business, and, you know, I just forgot about it and went on, you know, with what I was doing. And so here Dave, you know, through that connection, he was able to connect me in with Mark and the Chat Society through, you know, his connection, knowing him and being there.
Right.
That's another odd thing that I've never been able to explain. So, you know, that's why I say I've never been able to go in the front door like a normal person. It's always some crazy backwards thing that gets me to where I needed to be.
No, just
You
good.
explain it. I can't.